most of the MA63 historical grievances that were not resolved in the last 2 or 3 administrations. And in fact, he has gone on public saying that he has put the Deputy Prime Minister from Sarawak, Fadila Yusuf, he has put him in charge of MA63 issue. Now, this is really, really interesting for somebody like me, because there's actually a special cabinet position given to Aziman from Sabah. He's actually the minister in charge of Sabah Sarawak affairs. So it's quite interesting that now you have both 2 ministers who are looking specifically at MA63 issues, the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister in charge of Sabah Sarawak affairs. Okay, so the hope is that both of them are actually working towards the same goal. So what can we expect? So I expect Anwar Ibrahim to approve more decentralization. In other words, more and more administrative powers will be handed back to Sabah and Sarawak. In the case of Sabah, they've been asking for 40% return of all the taxes or money raised from Sabah. This is actually written in the constitution. So I expect Anwar Ibrahim to approve the payment. The formula has already been given to the cabinet, but they haven't announced what is the results of the formula. But what I expect them to do is actually to make the payment to Sabah in stages, because they can't afford to pay the 40% one go. Because the idea is that you have to pay the 40% calculated from 1973. So, because they said, the MA63 thing, you never kept to your word, and therefore you've got to accumulate all this, right? Just as a footnote, right, the reason why the Sabahans are so passionate about this is because one of the constant complaints you hear from the people of Sabah and Sarawak is that everything you see in Kuala Lumpur nowadays, all the iconic things, North-South Highway, Petronas Tower, KLIL, all this was built with money from the oil and gas resources in Sarawak. So in other words, we were underdeveloped since the 1970s because the money was siphoned off. So when you ask for 40% backdated all the way to 1973, it's only fair, right? But we also know the federal government do not have the money. So it is my understanding that even if the money will be paid, it will be paid in stages. It won't be one block. The other thing they're pushing very hard in terms of, remember I said that they wanted to treat it as equal partners. So the argument is that, we wanted to be treated as equal partners, and we want 1/3 share of the seats in parliament, okay? So the argument is that politics in Peninsular Malaysia or Malaya has gone haywire. There's too much religious stuff, there's too much political Islam, there's too much ethnic tensions. We need the 1/3 constitutional guarantee because, as you know, right, under the Malaysian system, if you want to amend the constitution, you need 2/3 majority. So you basically give the people of Sabah Sarawak the veto power if they have 1/3. Now, it depends on who you speak to. Some people say that cabinet has agreed. Some people say cabinet has not agreed. But whatever it is, nothing will happen for the next 2 years because you need to redraw the constituencies. And the next one will be done in 2026. So we will know whether they're really going to deliver this 1/3 seats in 2026. As you know, right, 24 hours is a long time in Malaysian politics. So I will not guess which way the wind will be blowing on this issue. The other thing they're asking for is constitutional amendment. They want to cement certain parts of the constitution to make sure that Sabah and Sarawak are guaranteed autonomy. It is my argument that this will not happen for at least for the next 2 years. So even if Anwar is in power, he will not push for any more constitutional amendment because based on my few interviews, it's quite clear that the Malay political establishment has no more appetite to give additional concessions to Sabah and Sarawak. They think that we've already given you enough concession. You have to, stay where you are for the next couple of years. So the big thing now, right? The big argument now is actually through a thing called the PDA. As you know, the richest pot of gold in Malaysia is this thing called Petronas. And the unique thing about Petronas is that Petronas as a GLC in Malaysia is unique. It's unique because the way the rules of setting up Petronas, the reason why it's unique is that Petronas only reports to the Prime Minister. Okay, this is really unique among all the GLCs. You can ask people who study GLC, they'll tell you that Petronas is unique, that it only answers to the Prime Minister. So remember what I said about Sabah and Sarawak? They said that the oil and gas belongs to them. So Sabah and Sarawak want to tap back oil and gas, and they said that we want to renegotiate PDA, which in my opinion is not possible. The reason is that the dividends given by the Petronas to the federal government is crucial for the developmental aspects of the Malaysian budget. So there is no way the federal government is going to give oil and gas resources back to Sabah and Sarawak. And it's also because of that this thing called state nationalism in Sabah and Sarawak will still remain very strong, because you can't give this back. There's no way the federal government can give this back. So what we see in the coming years is that you will see increasingly Petronas will be forced to negotiate with the governments of Sabah and Sarawak in terms of downstreaming activities. So in the case of Sarawak, they've set up their own oil company called Petros. And in Sabah, what they did was that they copied directly from Sarawak. They created a thing called SMJ Petroleum. So the idea was that you have state-based oil company who take care of all the downstreaming process from the national oil company Petronas. So all the Petronas subsidiary in West Malaysia doing the retail stuff in Sabah and Sarawak. In Sarawak, it will run by Petros. In Sabah, it will run by SMJ. Okay, now this is crucially important because the state governments of Sabah and Sarawak have to show their own people that we are getting something from the oil and gas resources or business opportunities, because we can't claim back the ownership. So this is the best they can do for the next several years. Okay, then I better rush through. So quickly on the Borneo block, as I mentioned, they're trying to create this thing called the Borneo block. Altogether, in theory, it's 57 MPs. My argument is that it's not possible simply because there's very low level of trust between the political elites of Sabah and Sarawak. In fact, the political elites in Sarawak, GPS, thinks that the Sabahan politicians are mostly cowboys. They can never get the act together. So it will be a bit hard for them to come together, at least for the short future. Right, so in the short run, we will have Sarawak. They'll consolidate themselves under the Sarawak First philosophy. So the political fortress the idea is to create Sarawak as a state within larger federation. They won't allow any of this so-called toxic political culture from Malaya to be imported into Sarawak. In Sabah, slightly different, because the Muslims are majority in Sabah. We can expect Sabah politics to be more unsettled until the next state election. Basically, MS63 issues, unstoppable. There's no way that you can stop the rise of state nationalism for the reasons I've given just now. Bottom line, federal government will not grant any more autonomy, and they'll definitely not give back oil and gas, but they'll do other things like provide more money. Very important point. Politicians in Sabah and Sarawak do not owe loyalty to any of the political groups in Peninsular Malaysia. Okay? Never forget a very important point. During the 5 days of negotiations to form the federal government, GPS initially wanted to go with Perikatan Nasional, but they were forced to backtrack and go with UMNO. Okay? So they don't have any loyalties. So if anything happens in Peninsular Malaysia, right, they'll look at which way the wind is blowing and they'll try to go with the winners. So the final word is that G15, in my point of view, was largely a failure in two ways related to Sabah and Sarawak. One was that the voters did not select a clear winner in Peninsular Malaysia. Okay, and this created political instability that forced the royal institutions to get involved. Secondly, as my colleague has mentioned, the rise of PAS has meant a fundamental challenge. So is the green wave a permanent wave, or is it really an anti-Zahid vote, anti-Najib vote? Okay, and we'll find out very soon because the state elections are coming. But the bottom line for Sabah Sarawak is this. If federal politics is not stable, you cannot expect political stability in Sabah and Sarawak because everything is linked together. But ironically, if you have a very, very strong and stable federal government, the Sabahans and Sarawakians will also be unhappy because it means that they'll ignore Sabah and Sarawak on autonomy issues as well. So you have to strike a very fine balance. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. If I can invite you both to take